Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham public schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet. Always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, "I'm still here. I'm present." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent. A smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. "Miss Daniels." It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. "Not yet." Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now. Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. Right this way, sir. But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet, the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. This is two-way, right? He asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. Yes, sir, she replied. Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now. Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. How is this addressed? The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption. Disruption? Marlene lifted her eyebrows. Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I'd already been seated? That is not a small matter. The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. Ma'am, the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. Please. Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. Thank you, she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. Excuse me? The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. Hello, she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. What transpired here doesn't feel right. Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that? A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving, she said. No, the woman responded, her voice rising. You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will, and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. I'm sorry, the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards two, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager, 2 rows back, had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne, he stated. The woman in denim remained still. No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black. That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. That's unfair, a younger man murmured. There's no way that should have occurred. Another person then spoke, their voice raised. Return her seat. The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance, he stated. I simply took the one they assigned to me. The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once. He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. It's not my responsibility. The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time. However, the man wearing the tiger's cap interrupted. Not until she receives her seat back. He turned and addressed Marlene. Ma'am, he said, would you like your seat back? She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed, she stated quietly. You are not, the woman from row 2 responded. You are the reason it might finally be rectified. That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. If she doesn't receive her seat, someone declared, we are not sitting either. Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. We need to halt boarding, a fellow passenger interjected. It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately. Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. I didn't request this situation, she stated. However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline. Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. Good for you. You didn't deserve that. We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them. By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "You're a class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated, and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Lewis. Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming. She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. You made it, she murmured. Naturally I did. Marlene responded. Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me? They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations. I didn't attempt to, Marlene stated. I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore. Alia concurred. Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention. Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call, said a representative. We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands. I'm flattered, Marlene said plainly, but I won't be attending. The woman on the other end paused. May I ask why? Marlene responded, I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to. Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plain aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, "I am aware of my identity." As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present. A 10-year-old black boy spoke honestly. His teacher publicly embarrassed him before the entire class, but a more significant moment occurred when his father, the mayor, entered the room silently. This incident began immediately following the morning announcements at Oakwood Elementary in Topeka, Kansas. The bell had just sounded, and the noise of chairs moving and students taking their places echoed throughout the classroom. Mrs. Trudy Holbrook was positioned to the front, arms crossed as usual, tapping her pen against the whiteboard. She was a teacher known for her rigid approach, prioritizing rules over warmth. For most students, she was acceptable, strict, but reliable. 10-year-old Malik Jefferson was seated by the window in the third row back. He was one of those students who didn't speak often, but when he did, people paid attention. Not because he was boisterous, but because he always conveyed his thoughts with purpose. He felt a surge of quiet satisfaction that morning. The night before, his dad had held a significant press conference regarding new scholarships for underserved communities. Malik had watched him on television and believed the entire city was now aware of what he already knew. His dad cared. As Mrs. Holbrook reviewed the day's plans, she announced a special visitor would be coming to the school on Friday. She stated that someone from City Hall would be present, adjusting her glasses as she spoke. They hadn't informed me of the person involved. Malik's hand rose slightly. "Yes, Malik?" she inquired, her tone already showing irritation. "I believe it could be my father," he stated calmly. "He mentioned he was traveling here this week. He holds the position of mayor." The room fell silent. Several children glanced around. One girl murmured, "Wait, is that true?" Mrs. Holbrook looked at him. She then released a brief, abrupt laugh, more of a derisive sound. "Oh, Malik, that's quite imaginative," she remarked, extending the final word as if it were hurtful. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, just sat there, eyes forward. "I'm not making it up," he said softly. "He's Mayor Jefferson," she said, her smile fading. "Malik, this is a place for learning, not for telling stories. If the mayor were your father, I think we'd all know by now, don't you?" The silence was thicker now. Some of the kids shifted in their chairs. A boy in the back let out a quiet laugh. Malik stared at the desk in front of him. His hands remained still in his lap. "Let's focus on the facts, not stories," she stated, and continued the lesson. However, the class was no longer engaged, still processing her previous statement and tone. The words were not simply dismissive, they held a sharper edge, conveying a message. "Someone like you couldn't possibly be someone like that, son." The most painful aspect wasn't the content of her words, but the swiftness with which the class embraced them. Jasmine, who typically sat with Malik at lunch, avoided looking at him for the remainder of the morning. Two boys positioned by the window murmured and chuckled each time he spoke. Malik remained silent for the rest of the lesson, not due to fear, but because he felt it wasn't worthwhile. Afterward, that same day, in the hallway, his friend Bryce approached him close to the lockers. "Hey man," Bryce said, sounding somewhat unsure. Malik didn't pause. "Yeah," Bryce acknowledged slowly. She didn't need to phrase it that way. Bryce looked down, thinking she believed he was lying. Malik offered a hesitant shrug, suggesting she tell the principal. Would it make a difference? For a moment, Bryce couldn't respond. Inside the classroom, Mrs. Holbrook resumed teaching as if nothing had occurred. She likely assumed the incident was resolved. A student had made a false statement, and a teacher had corrected him. Case closed. But that's the nature of words. They don't always fade when the school day ends. The events didn't remain confined to the classroom, as someone beyond those walls had become aware of what occurred and intended to speak out. By Thursday morning, Malik felt uncomfortable. He woke up early, as he always did, dressed, and sat through breakfast with his mom, who observed his unusual quietness. He remained largely silent. He wasn't one to express complaints. That wasn't how he was raised. Nevertheless, a weighty feeling settled in his chest. The feeling lingered, the sting of speaking honestly and being met with derision. As he entered room 204, Mrs. Holbrook had already begun writing the warm-up exercise on the board. The classroom appeared identical to the previous day. The same rows of desks, the same posters on the walls, the same teacher present. Yet, something felt different. Students whispered more frequently than usual. Several glanced in Malik's direction before quickly averting their gaze. He noticed Jasmine whispering to a classmate, her eyes flickering towards him, a giggle escaping her lips. Then came the moment that reignited the tension. Mrs. Holbrook started a history lesson, focusing on community leaders and local government. The situation felt heavy with irony, enough to fill the entire school. As she wrote the names of elected officials on the whiteboard, she briefly looked at Malik and gave a smile, but it lacked warmth. "You know," she said, addressing the class, "we should always be cautious about feigning a different identity. Honesty is particularly crucial for significant positions, such as mayor or governor." She refrained from mentioning his name, yet the effect was unmistakable. Every eye in the classroom shifted toward Malik, as if by design. He remained composed, lowering his head and recording the date in his notebook. "Let's return to the facts," she continued, her smile unwavering. "It's easy for anyone to claim they're the mayor's child. That assertion isn't enough. Verifiable evidence is what truly matters." A chuckle arose from somewhere in the rear of the classroom. The release was sudden, a brief moment where the pressure gave way. She made no effort to restrain it. In fact, she seemed to find it amusing, as if she's told a perfectly executed jest. However, to Malik, it wasn't a jest. It wasn't an instruction either. It was a disguised humiliation, presented with a formal demeanor and a whiteboard marker in her hand. He tightened his grip on his pencil, not to damage it, merely to maintain composure. Bryce was in the front row, visibly uneasy, his mouth slightly parted as if he had something to say but couldn't articulate it. The remainder of the lesson passed quickly. For the first time, Malik didn't volunteer any answers, didn't offer to read aloud, and didn't even complete the worksheet. During recess, he walked the edge of the playground by himself. No one inquired about his well-being. They were preoccupied with continuing to laugh at the joke. Bryce rejoined him again, close to the jungle gym. "You really should tell someone I did," Malik said. "Who?" "My mom." "Is she going to call the school?" "She told my dad." Bryce blinked. "Wait, the mayor, Malik nodded. There was a pause. "What's he going to do?" Malik looked out past the fence. "He said I should keep showing up." That sounded simple, but it hit hard. Malik didn't need his dad to yell or storm the building. He needed to know someone still believed him. And he did. That afternoon, while students engaged in silent reading, Mrs. Holbrook introduced the topic of respecting authority. She posed several questions and then stated, "And naturally, we must not pretend to be someone we are not to achieve that authority. Such actions would be dishonest and disrespectful to genuine leaders in our community." She then made eye contact with Malik for a moment that felt deliberate and directed towards him. He looked up at her and then lowered his gaze to his book. Mrs. Holbrook turned away, likely believing the issue was resolved. Perhaps she thought her brief remarks had restored order to the classroom, that the lesson had been conveyed, and her authority reasserted. However, she was unaware that another individual had listened intently and was approaching to ensure the lesson she believed she was imparting would be entirely revised. The dining hall at Oakwood Elementary was a noisy area, not due to disorder, but because of established habits, trays making sounds, chairs scraping, juice boxes opening. But that Thursday, a different sound was present, a sound that lingered around specific tables and focused on one name, as if it were a mark. Malik was seated opposite Bryce at the far end of table 5, pushing the tater tots around on his tray. He hadn't touched his chocolate milk, which was unusual. Typically, it was the first thing he consumed. Bryce spoke softly, drawing closer. "People are still discussing it. I'm aware of that. I overheard Ava mention her mother said Mayor Jefferson's son attend a private school." Malik glanced up, his brow raised. "Yes, I attend a private school. I only transferred here 2 months ago. My mother wanted me nearer to her workplace." Bryce rubbed his head. "I suppose people just prefer to think you're being deceptive. They'd rather believe that than accept that I'm telling the truth." They both looked down the table, where 2 kids were giggling and whispering, glancing back and forth at Malik. One of them, a boy named Derek, leaned over and said, "Just loud enough. Guess anyone can say their dad's the mayor now, huh?" Malik didn't answer. Bryce stood up halfway, then stopped himself. "Not worth it," Malik muttered. The whole room felt colder, even though the sun poured through the windows like any other day, but kids had a way of carrying an echo. A statement, once made, lingered like a marble on a tile surface. It didn't disappear simply because the speaker stopped. Jasmine walked past their table accompanied by 2 friends, and one of them murmured, "He still thinks he's the mayor's kid." That was the instant Bryce rose to his feet. "You'll need to be quiet," he stated, his voice wavering a little. People turned to look. Jasmine appeared surprised briefly, then folded her arms, were merely expressing what everyone is already thinking. Perhaps it was time for everyone to reconsider perspectives like those of Mrs. Holbrook. A noticeable change occurred. Several students visibly reacted, some widening their eyes. A few even murmured quietly amongst themselves. Bryce quickly took a seat, his heart racing. Malik remained silent, simply observing his friend. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his lips. However, lunch continued. A girl named Kaylee, seated at a nearby table, raised her hand partway and said, "Wait, I saw Mayor Jefferson last year at the ribbon cutting at West Park. Didn't he have a kid with him?" Bryce turned to her. "Yeah, that was Malik." She squinted. His hair was different. It was shorter back then, Malik said, finally speaking up. Kaylee stared at him. A few kids at her table grew quiet. One appeared unsure. Another leaned in and whispered something. Gradually, the doubt started to diminish. The structure remained intact, but it shifted slightly. That's often the beginning. Not with a declaration or an explanation, but with uncertainty, quiet, an absence in the usual sounds. When the bell signaled the end of lunch, Malik took his tray and rose. He didn't hurry, and he didn't droop. He moved with the composure of someone possessing knowledge that others lacked. Bryce followed. As they headed back, passing Mrs. Hallbrook's classroom, they observed her standing close to the doorway, talking to a different teacher. She noticed them but didn't smile. She simply observed. For 1 second too long, Bryce looked toward Malik. "She knows your dad's coming, doesn't she?" Malik replied. He said he'd stop by today. They didn't converse much after that. There was nothing further to discuss. Rumors had spread throughout the building, and whether people accepted them was irrelevant, as the truth still had more to reveal about that classroom, because something significant was already unfolding and was nearer than anyone realized. By the time Anthony Jefferson entered his office at City Hall that Thursday morning, his phone had already buzzed twice. Carla, his assistant, was waiting, holding a folder and wearing the concerned expression she reserved for sensitive matters. "It's about Malik," she stated even before he had removed his blazer. Anthony paused. "What about him?" Carla quietly closed the door. "You might want to sit down." He remained standing. She opened the folder, which contained 2 printed emails. One was from another parent concerning an incident in Mrs. Hellbrook's classroom. The second message came from the school secretary, a person Anthony had known for years, informing him about a situation where his son was being questioned in front of others by his teacher concerning his family history. Anthony read both messages deliberately, with no visible emotion. He displayed neither anger nor panic. He simply sighed. Carla observed him intently. "Should I contact the school?" he asked. "No," he replied. "I will manage it myself." She nodded and departed silently. Anthony paused, his gaze fixed on the city map adorning the wall. He held a significant position. He was the first black mayor Topeka had elected. He had contested diligently for that office, not for the prestige, but driven by a belief in the power of visibility and representation, the conviction that young people like Malik should grow up feeling a sense of belonging. He settled into his chair, reached for his phone, and dialed a number from memory. "Hello." His wife answered. "Did Malik mention anything to you?" A moment of silence followed. "He recounted yesterday's events to me," she stated. However, he didn't wish to escalate the situation. "It is a significant matter," Anthony asserted. She publicly embarrassed him before everyone. His wife released a sigh. He claimed he was fine. "He isn't." Another pause followed. "So what's your plan?" "I'm going to the school. Would you like to accompany me?" "No, but I need you to collect him afterward." "Very well," she replied softly. "Make it meaningful." He ended the call, rose, retrieved his navy suit jacket from the back of the chair, and adjusted his tie in the mirror. The situation wasn't intended to be argumentative. He avoided unnecessary disagreements. However, certain teachings required direct interaction. As he exited the building, 2 aides attempted to detain him with urgent requests, but he dismissed them with a courteous yet resolute gesture. "This will be brief," he stated. The driver opened the vehicle door for him without prompting. No inquiries were made regarding his destination, yet they understood, judging by his expression, that it held significance. The journey to Oakwood Elementary proceeded in silence. As the car entered the school's visitor lot, several students were concluding recess. He observed Malik across the yard, heading toward the building with another boy. His demeanor appeared more subdued than normal. Anthony did not signal, nor did he speak. He simply watched. He waited in the front office for a brief period as the receptionist placed a call to room 204. She offered him coffee. He refused. After 10 minutes, a hallway aide directed him through the corridor. He proceeded deliberately, not due to apprehension, but to observe his surroundings. He needed time to assess the environment, the kind of world his son experienced while he attended city council meetings and addressed questions from reporters. Before entering room 204, he hesitated. He detected the sounds of a lesson taking place within. He allowed the aide to resume her duties, then carefully turned the handle and opened the door. The lesson abruptly ceased, 30 sets of eyes fixed on the doorway. Standing there, tall, poised, and not smiling, was Mayor Anthony Jefferson. Unbeknownst to those in the room, this visit wasn't related to politics. It concerned fatherhood, truth, and ensuring silence wouldn't prevail. The classroom fell silent, as if someone had pressed pause. Mrs. Holbrook's mouth slightly opened. Her marker remained suspended in the air, paused halfway, through writing civic responsibility on the board. She didn't move for a moment. Every student's attention shifted from her to the man standing at the entryway. Malik glanced up. He paused momentarily. It wasn't due to apprehension, but something different. A sense of ease, familiarity. The way his father occupied a space wasn't with loudness or spectacle. It was with an inherent quality, a kind that didn't solicit focus. It simply existed. Mayor Jefferson entered, without haste, without agitation. He didn't appear upset. He didn't appear self-satisfied. He appeared like a man who was fully aware of what had been stated, and who wanted it to end. Mrs. Holbrook initiated the conversation. Mayor Jefferson, acknowledging with a single nod, responded, "I'm sure it is." She moved aside a little uncomfortably, almost as if making room for him, even though she appeared somewhat displaced. The mayor surveyed the surroundings. "I'd like to address the class briefly, if that's acceptable." She paused. "I hadn't been notified of I won't take long." She retreated further. Anthony Jefferson then turned to the students. "Some of you are familiar with me, and others may not be. I am Anthony Jefferson. I serve as the mayor of this city. But more importantly," he paused and let his eyes land on Malik. "I'm Malik's dad." The silence deepened. Not a cough, not a whisper. Even the kids who had been giggling the day before were frozen now. He continued, his tone even. "Yesterday and today, my son was told by someone in authority that he couldn't possibly be who he said he was. That claiming me as his father was some kind of joke." He didn't look at Mrs. Holbrook. Not once. Everyone understood who he was referring to. "I'm not intending to cause anyone discomfort. I don't support that approach. However, I do value significant instances. These are times when individuals gain an understanding of what respect entails and what it doesn't." He paused and looked around the classroom. Respect involves attentive listening, even when a person's narrative differs from your preconceived notions. It requires trusting a student when they speak, particularly when they are sharing their genuine experiences. And it necessitates acknowledging that your expectations do not determine another person's lived reality. A young woman in the front row fidgeted. Malik observed silently, without blinking, carefully taking in every word. Anthony continued. "Serving as mayor involves more than just legislation or official gatherings. It's about demonstrating the right behavior. My son didn't require me to protect him. He needed me to be present. And here I am, yet still no one moved." Then, gradually, he turned to address the woman seated at the room's front. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said, his voice remaining even, "I expect this won't recur. Not to my son, and not to any student." She started to speak, but remained silent. Only a brief, hesitant nod followed. He understood and addressed the class, saying, "I'll leave you to your learning." Malik's gaze met his son's. "We'll talk later," Malik acknowledged, nodding in return. A sense of release washed over him. The first easing he's felt all day. Mayor Jefferson departed without a ceremony or applause. The silence was profound, echoing more powerfully than any possible outburst. In the hallway, Anthony hesitated. He felt no need to glance over his shoulder. Within the classroom, there was no laughter. There was no murmuring. Mrs. Holbrook remained motionless, her hands clasped firmly. The lesson had ceased, yet a different atmosphere had begun. Despite the mayor's departure from the room, the consequences lingered. They persisted significantly. Certain statements cannot be undone, and certain realities remain even after the door shuts. The remainder of the school day proceeded sluggishly, as if the power had been disconnected. The students were more subdued, demonstrating greater concentration. It wasn't fear that prompted their actions, but a heightened understanding. A tangible change had occurred. Mrs. Holbrook attempted to resume her previous approach. Her tone remained even, yet her hands trembled slightly as she handled the marker. She avoided eye contact, refrained from calling on Malik, and made no further mention of civic responsibility. Malik, meanwhile, adopted a more upright posture. He displayed no smile. He made no effort to demonstrate anything. He simply listened, recorded notes, responded to questions when prompted, as was his usual practice. This time, however, the students were attentive. When the bell signaled the end of class and backpacks were being packed, the students departed more deliberately. Several cast quick looks in Malik's direction as they passed. A few offered a quiet, "See you," or gave subtle nods of acknowledgement. Jasmine paused near the door, appearing as though she desired to speak, but ultimately left with her friends. Bryce remained near Malik's desk. "Are you all right?" Bryce asked. "I'm fine," Malik replied. Then he didn't raise his voice. Bryce affirmed, "It wasn't necessary." What resonated most with people was the manner in which Mayor Jefferson entered that classroom, conveyed what was necessary, and departed without raising his voice. There was no yelling, no intimidation, no theatrical display. He simply stated the truth. And truth requires no amplification. It only needs to be spoken. Subsequently that afternoon, Mrs. Hallbrook sat alone at her desk as the halls emptied. Her fingers paused above her keyboard, a blank email draft displayed before her. The expression in Anthony Jefferson's eyes lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't anger, nor cruelty, simply disappointment, and a certainty as if he'd witnessed similar actions repeatedly and was weary of them. She replayed her words, not only those spoken to Malik, but those spoken near him about him. The sarcasm, the tone, the incredulity, they now reverberated, prominent and unwelcome. No reprimand had been issued. No public exposure had occurred. However, the sense of shame was genuine, and it remained. She closed the email without composing a reply. Later that evening, Malik was on the couch completing his homework when his dad entered the room. He loosened his tie and sat down next to him. "You conducted yourself admirably," Anthony remarked. Malik looked up. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't yield, you didn't recede, and that's significant," his father responded. Malik shut his notebook. "Why didn't you speak to her earlier?" he inquired. "I wanted you to develop your own voice initially," his father explained. However, when someone discredits your reputation in front of a group of people, it's no longer a subtle matter. It becomes a public affair. And I don't allow public disrespect to go unaddressed. Malik paused briefly. He observed that she appeared frightened, and she should have felt responsible. A period of silence followed, where they felt at ease and were being truthful. Subsequently, Malik's mom brought in dinner. The television displayed the evening news in the background. The school remained quiet. There were no announcements or public discussion, but the necessary events had transpired. The following day at school, an altered atmosphere prevailed. It wasn't a miraculous resolution, but a palpable shift. Mrs. Hallbrook addressed the class with a more subdued demeanor. She refrained from excessive corrections or a manufactured apology, and the sharpness was absent from her voice. Her eyes no longer expressed frustration when Malik raised his hand. And when he briefly referred to his father in a writing assignment, she remained silent. Malik's classmates gave him more room. Some even showed him a quiet deference, not due to his father's identity, but because of how he had dealt with the situation. Calm, honest, steadfast. These were the qualities that resonated. However, even as the familiar patterns returned, one thing became evident. The truth had been disseminated, and the surrounding hush had finally ceased. The Monday following, the school hallways were as lively as they always were. The sound of sneakers on the floor, the clang of lockers, and the echoes of laughter filled the hallways. Yet, a subtle change had occurred, not only in room 204, but throughout the entire school. Students were no longer speaking about Malik in hushed tones. Instead, they observed him with a different kind of attention, not with the air of legend, not with the amusement of a shared joke, but with the recognition of someone who had faced a challenge head-on and remained steadfast. Malik walked through the hall with Bryce, as was their usual routine. But Bryce was the first to recognize it. Students seemed to make way a bit faster. Some even offered silent nods as they passed. It wasn't from fear, it was a sign of respect. It wasn't solely because Malik's dad held the office of mayor, it was Malik's own quiet confidence, which needed no justification. At lunchtime, Jasmine finally went to their table. "Hey," she said, holding her tray. Malik looked up. "Hi." Malik paused. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean to laugh. I didn't think it was amusing. I don't know." He reassured her. "It's all right," he said. "Just, please don't participate next time." She acknowledged him, seeming slightly ashamed, and left. That's the nature of change. It doesn't always manifest as a significant event. Occasionally, it comes through uncomfortable dialogues and understated choices. Mrs. Holbrook never issued a formal apology. However, during the subsequent week, she began phrasing her inquiries differently. She included Malik more frequently. She smiled, but not with that rigid, artificial expression. It was presented in a manner suggesting an attempt at improvement, even without expressing it verbally. She also sent a handwritten, brief note home at the end of the week. Malik continues to contribute insight and maturity to the classroom. "Thank you for raising such a respectful young man." His father read it in the kitchen and remained silent. He simply handed it to Malik and offered a quiet nod of approval. In the weeks that followed, Malik's name was no longer solely connected to his father. Children began sharing stories about how he consistently provided the best answers in science class. They recalled how he assisted Ava in locating her missing library book. They noted how he defended a third grader who had dropped his tray in the lunchroom. The narrative concerning the mayor entering room 204 was, naturally, still recounted. However, it wasn't the humorous ending that resonated. It was the underlying message. That dignity carries more weight than loudness. That truth doesn't invariably require corroboration, but warrants acknowledgement. It's important that even a classroom, particularly a classroom, should not be a place where someone is told what they cannot be. Malik did not revisit the matter. He didn't need to. He demonstrated what needed demonstrating. His father had expressed what needed expressing, and the silence that previously attempted to overwhelm him had been broken. Several weeks later, during an assembly concerning leadership, the principal highlighted the significance of presence. She refrained from naming anyone, yet all those seated in the folding chairs understood the subject of her remarks. Prior to their departure that afternoon, Bryce turned to Malik and quietly said, "You know she was referencing you, correct?" Malik offered a slight shrug. "Perhaps." Bryce smiled. "The next occasion someone accuses you of dishonesty, I'm merely gesturing towards the door and anticipating your dad's arrival." Malik chuckled. "No way. Next time, I'll address it personally." And he was sincere. While his dad had walked in that day to say what needed to be said, Malik had done something even harder. He stayed. He sat through the laughter, the whispers, the weight of being doubted. And he never faltered. And that kind of strength doesn't come from titles or headlines. It comes from knowing who you are, even when someone else tries to rewrite your story. Some bruises fade, but lessons, the ones worth remembering, they last a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who would benefit from hearing it. Stories like this are important, as respect, identity, and truth should never be compromised. In a park, she performed a life-saving act for someone she didn't know. 3 hours passed, and then 5 high-end automobiles arrived at her residence. The subsequent events rendered her utterly stunned. 20 years. That was the duration of Denise Lattimore's service to that hospital. She wasn't simply a nurse, she was the nurse. The one they consulted when situations became critical. The one who eagerly accepted the less desirable shifts. Holidays, weekends, overnight assignments. Denise was consistently present. And then, abruptly, she ceased her service. The electronic message arrived at 6:42 a.m. While she was sipping her first cup of coffee, her shift wasn't supposed to start until 7:30. There was no meeting, no call. Just a subject line that read position status update. She clicked it and read, "We regret to inform you that due to internal restructuring, your position has been terminated effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be deposited by the end of the week." We thank you for your years of service. That was it. No signature, no explanation. Denise watched the screen, anticipating additional information. A follow-up, a phone number. Anything, nothing. She blinked, shut the laptop, and remained still. Her daughter, Mecca, was still asleep upstairs. The last thing Denise desired was for her to awaken and observe her mother falling apart before 7 a.m. Denise placed the coffee mug in the sink and stood for a full minute with her hands braced on the counter. She didn't cry. Not yet. She grabbed her keys, slipped on her running shoes, and left a note on the table. Went for a walk. Be back soon. Love you. She didn't even bother to change out of her scrubs. She walked out the door and headed for Avondale Park, one of the oldest in Birmingham. It was quiet this time of morning. Just a few regulars walking their dogs, a jogger here and there. Denise wasn't sure what she was doing. She hadn't planned this walk. She hadn't planned anything. A weight settled in her chest, a feeling she needed to process. The phrases from the email echoed in her mind. We regret to inform you. She considered it harsh, not just the dismissal, but the moment it occurred. Her daughter had recently begun her studies at Miles College. Tuition payments were approaching, and Denise had been striving to manage every dollar to cover expenses. There had been no prior notice, no meeting, no warning, simply a formal, impersonal message. She walked until her calves ached. She located a bench overlooking the small lake and sat down. Her phone vibrated. It was Mecca. Hey, Mom, everything okay? It read, Didn't hear you leave. Denise looked at the message. She began to type a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Yeah, I'm fine. Just needed air. Love you. She set the phone down and leaned back against the bench. The sky was a gentle, early blue, the kind of color that could make you momentarily forget how difficult life can be. I gave them everything, she murmured, not realizing she had spoken aloud. To anyone else observing, she appeared like just another woman taking a morning walk. But internally, Denise was falling apart, not solely due to the job loss, but from the silence that followed. No one from the hospital contacted her. No one sent a message. 20 years, and not a single farewell. She rubbed her eyes. She wouldn't cry in a park, but something within her altered right then. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was grief. Perhaps it was anger disguised in a gentler form. For the first time in a long time, Denise felt still. Not okay, just still. Then she heard it. A sound. Quick, sharp, like someone hitting the pavement hard. She turned her head. A man had fallen near the trail, just beyond the row of hedges. He was maybe in his late 50s, face down on the ground, motionless. People looked, but no one moved. But Denise did. Denise didn't hesitate. Her body kicked into gear before her mind even caught up. She rose quickly, running towards the man prone on the asphalt. As she approached, the heat of the pavement was noticeable, along with the odor of sweat and a metallic tang. She wasn't sure if it was blood or fear. He remained still. Sir? She asked, kneeling beside him. Can you hear me? There was no response. Several individuals had paused at a safe distance. No one advanced. She carefully turned him over, observing his chest for signs of life, his neck for a pulse. His complexion was ashen. A bluish tint was appearing on his lips. Denise placed her fingers on the side of his neck. She felt nothing. Call 911, she shouted without looking up. Someone mumbled, already did, but it seemed unimportant. She began counting seconds. She tilted his head back, checking his airway. Then she leaned in, delivered 2 quick breaths, and started compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her hands moved as if she's done this many times before. But this wasn't a training dummy. This was real. This was a matter of life or death. An audience observed, whispering and recording with their phones. However, their presence was insignificant. It was solely about her and him, and the sound of her hands striking his chest. Come on, she murmured. Don't you dare give up. He appeared to be in his mid-50s, dressed in a fitted black workout set, with a wedding ring and an Apple Watch. He seemed like the type of man who should be too healthy to collapse in public. But hearts are not governed by appearances. 1 minute passed, then 2. Denise felt sweat soaking through her scrubs, her hair plastered to her forehead. Her arms were sore, and her back throbbed. She continued working, focusing on her breathing. She compressed and counted. The silence was intense, a silence that felt like it was holding its breath. Then he gasped. The breath was weak and strained, but it was a breath. Denise moved closer. "Hey, are you with me?" His eyelids flickered. His chest moved a slight movement. Paramedics arrived less than a minute later. Two of them rushed from the ambulance, carrying equipment. "I got him breathing," Denise said swiftly, stepping aside to allow them to take over. "No pulse when I arrived." I immediately began compressions. One of the medics acknowledged her. "Are you a nurse?" She replied, "I was." He didn't have time to inquire further. They proceeded with urgency. Oxygen mask, defibrillator pads, and vital signs assessment. Denise retreated, allowing the trained professionals to take charge. Her hands trembled. Someone behind her commented, "You saved him." She turned to see a woman, mid-30s, a jogger, visibly anxious. "You were incredible," the woman added. I didn't know what to do." Denise nodded once, then turned her eyes back to the man on the ground. She didn't need thanks. She just needed him to live. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, one of the paramedics looked at her and said, "You bought him time. That man's lucky you were here." Denise gave a tired half-smile. "I guess we both are," she said, watching as the ambulance pulled away. Sirens off. That was usually a good sign. The crowd began to thin, individuals returning to their daily lives as if nothing had occurred, as though they hadn't just witnessed a stranger die and return before their very eyes. Denise remained still for a brief moment, her heart racing. She then proceeded back towards the bench where it all began, sat down once more, and picked up her phone. Mecca had sent another message. "Mom, are you okay? Would you like me to bring breakfast?" Denise gazed at the message, her thumbs pausing above the screen. She then typed, "I'll be home soon." An event occurred. "I'll explain when I return," she texted. She didn't know the man's name, didn't know if he'd survived the day. Her actions weren't for praise. It was a reaction. It was inherent. It was her purpose. Although her professional role had shifted, her identity remained unchanged. But the world had a peculiar habit of returning when you least anticipated it. Denise didn't realize how quickly that return would happen. 3 hours later, Denise was back home. Mud clung to her shoes, a souvenir from the park, and she was still wearing her scrubs. Mecca had prepared eggs and toast, placing them on the stove before heading to her shift at the daycare. The house was silent, punctuated only by the ticking of the wall clock, which consistently ran 5 minutes fast. Denise settled onto the front porch, cradling a chipped mug of green tea. She held it with both hands, attempting to find comfort in its warmth rather than dwell on the persistent tension beneath her ribs. Her thoughts were jumbled, with fragments of the incident in the park and recollections of the chilling email. She couldn't erase the image of his face, the initial stillness of his chest. She remembered the moment she felt a return of life under her hands. She had witnessed people flatline previously, but this felt deeply personal. She took a deliberate sip, then she registered the sound. Engines, several of them. She raised her head from her mug and blinked. 5 luxury vehicles approached her street, following one another. These weren't simply elegant cars. They were the type usually seen in magazines or on social media influencers' profiles. Among them was a Lucid Air, a Mercedes Maybach, a matte black Escalade reflecting the afternoon light, a Rolls-Royce Ghost, and trailing behind, a sleek Aston Martin that emitted a distinct, almost living sound. The vehicles decelerated and halted directly in front of her house. A peculiar sensation arose within her, not fear precisely, but a more profound feeling, a quiet prompting. This concerns the events that followed. The entrance of the Lucid opened. A man emerged, tall, wearing a sharp suit, untied, charcoal gray with a black shirt beneath. He was clean-shaven, silver highlighting his temples, his face bearing a tranquil expression as if possessing an eternity. It required a moment for recognition, but when he spoke, her breath halted. "Ms. Lattimore," she rose deliberately. He advanced, his walk fluid and assured, yet unpretentious. "I believe you saved my life earlier today," he stated. "At the park, Denise peered, trying to recognize him. Appearing calm, without any signs of distress, with his complexion restored and his eyes bright, he seemed almost transformed. But it was indeed him. You collapsed, she observed. I did, he confirmed with a slight nod. And I understand I wouldn't have recovered if it weren't for your assistance, she commented, setting down her mug. How did you locate me? He responded with a gentle, almost regretful smile. A person with my resources usually has people managing specifics, but let's just say I was highly driven. She felt her throat tighten. I didn't do it for any reason. I know, he said swiftly. That's precisely why I'm here. A younger woman, likely in her mid-30s, emerged from behind him, stepping out of the Escalade with a thick envelope and a small tablet. She remained silent, simply waiting. My name's Roland Greaves, the man stated. I have several companies, primarily in logistics and software. It's not a flashy business, but I've achieved success. Earlier today, I was approximately 30 seconds from not experiencing another sunrise. Denise adjusted her posture, her jaw moving. She wasn't certain of the direction this conversation would take, but it felt significant. I want to speak with you, Roland stated. Just 5 minutes. I'm not here to offer you a product or create a disturbance, but I have a debt I'm unsure how to resolve. She hesitated, remaining uncertain. She then said softly, You're welcome to sit if you wish. He nodded once. Thank you. They proceeded together to the porch. She observed the cars passing by. No one else emerged from the vehicles. As he settled into a chair, Roland surveyed the surroundings. Pleasant place. It has a lived-in feel. That's right, she replied. Mecca's room is the one with the damaged blind. She explained that she had broken it while trying to chase away a wasp. He smiled. Sounds like a spirited individual. Is she? A brief pause occurred. He then turned to her. May I ask you a personal question? She nodded. Why didn't you wait for another person to assist? Denise inhaled deeply. Because if it were me, I would have hoped someone wouldn't wait. He observed his gaze downwards. He nodded slowly. Then, he looked in her eyes once more. I needed to hear that, but Roland hadn't come solely to thank her. He'd come with a proposition, one that would assess the extent of her trust in the kindness of strangers. Denise leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed over her chest. So, she said, maintaining a level tone, what precisely is this concerning? Roland moved closer, his elbows gently on his knees. You gave me 12 minutes of your time, and in those 12 minutes you didn't pause. You didn't inquire who I was or what I might provide. You simply defended me. Denise remained silent. She wasn't swayed by words. She's heard numerous eloquent presentations at hospital fundraisers and board meetings. This felt distinct, but she still didn't understand his direction. I established a company from nothing, he stated. It began in a garage in Baton Rouge. My first product was shipped from a rented storage unit. I navigated through losses, lawsuits, and everything in between. Now I have 500 employees and the ability to set my own guidelines. He paused. But despite all of that, I've never encountered someone helping me without expecting something in return. Not since my mother. That sort of generosity. It alters your viewpoint. Denise observed him intently. So, what exactly are you proposing, Mr. Greaves? I'm not seeking assistance. He raised a hand. Nor am I. I'm not attempting to provide a rescue. I'm aiming to make an investment. She frowned slightly. I researched your background. He continued. After my assistant located the incident report, I requested your employment history. Hope you aren't upset. Denise gave a humorless laugh. I'm accustomed to people investigating my affairs. This week has been filled with new experiences. Roland smiled. You were the most sought-after nurse in your department. There were notes from patients in the files about you. One woman mentioned that you were the reason she was able to get out of bed following her surgery. She also threw a shoe at me when I instructed her to perform her breathing exercises. He laughed. Nevertheless, she recalled you fondly. Then he retrieved something from his pocket. It was small, square, and black. He sat on the arm of her chair. A key fob. What is that? She inquired, looking at it but not touching it. It's for one of the cars parked outside, he said. The Lucid. Brand new. It's yours if you'd like it. Denise paused, studying it. Are you serious? She asked. As a second heart attack. he replied, only partially teasing. She didn't take the key. Why me? She questioned. I don't know many people like you, he stated plainly, and I've been thinking lately. I want to surround myself with people who move toward the problem, not away from it. People who act without needing a reason. He looked at her, his expression gentling. So I'd like to offer you a job. Denise blinked. He continued, I'm launching a new initiative. A wellness foundation linked to our company, focused on underserved communities, free clinics, training programs, and mental health outreach. Needs assistance. Funding is available, but we lack the personnel to establish it. We require someone with your expertise to help build it. Someone who understands the system's complexities and knows what individuals truly need. He paused. You would be director of clinical programs, responsible for setting the strategic direction and building your own team. The compensation is excellent, with full benefits. And you would have the autonomy to shape the foundation. She stared at him, speechless. Alternatively, he suggested softly, you're allowed to decline. I will still provide the vehicle. I will still express my gratitude. However, if you accept, I believe we have the potential to create something substantial. A pause settled between them, but it lacked tension. At length, Denise inquired, what would motivate you to entrust such a significant duty to someone you have only just met? Roland remained composed, stating, because occasionally, the instance in which someone rescues your life reveals that they are the individual you were meant to have known from the beginning. Denise found herself at a loss for words. She glanced at the key fob once more. Then, she looked at him. You'll give me time to think, take as long as you want. Just know this. I didn't come here to reward you. I came because I think the world needs more people like you making decisions that matter. But as soon as Roland left, Denise's heart remained unsettled. If anything, it pounded faster, because accepting meant stepping into something she wasn't sure she could manage, and that scared her more than losing a job ever did. That night, Denise remained restless. She sat on the bed's edge in the dimness, the faint light from the hallway offering little illumination. Her fingers followed the contours of the advanced key fob still on her nightstand, and used since Roland departed. It seemed overly substantial, overly swift, too remarkable to be genuine. She had experienced disappointment previously, not solely connected to the hospital. Years earlier, Mecca's father had pledged them security, only to disappear as debts accumulated. Denise understood from a young age to be wary of smiles, even those that appeared gentle. However, this opportunity felt different. It wasn't charity, it was a chance, one she hadn't anticipated. Needing a moment to herself, she put on a hoodie, placed the key fob in her pocket, and went outside. The Lucid remained, parked silently beneath the streetlight, its design distinct, its paint rich and flawless like midnight. She opened the driver's side door, anticipating an alarm. There was none. The vehicle greeted her as if familiar with her. Within, the cabin remained still and quiet, the dashboard illuminated with a gentle hum. She refrained from starting the engine. Instead, she simply sat, her palms resting on the steering wheel, inhaling a scent reminiscent of fresh leather and potential. She didn't register Mecca until the passenger door opened. Okay, Mom, her daughter stated, entering the car. Who did you rescue? And what sort of James Bond operation were you involved in? Denise looked up, surprised. What are you doing awake? The porch light was on, and you weren't in your room. That's code for Mom is spiraling. Mecca glanced around. This car is insane, by the way. Denise sighed. It was the man in the park. He found me. Mecca turned sharply. What? How? He's not just some guy. His name's Roland Greaves, owns like 3 companies. He offered me a job. Mecca's eyes widened. Doing what? Building something. A clinic. A program. He wants me to run it. Wait. He once met you, almost lost his life, and now wants you to lead his company's health division? That's the summary. Mecca reclined in the seat. And you're presently in the car he provided. Because you haven't decided yet. I don't want to accept something I didn't earn. Mom, Mecca said, looking at her. You save his life. You deserve the air in this car. Denise remained quiet. Look, Mecca continued. I understand. You're apprehensive. This feels like an opportunity that's almost unbelievable. You always said, Fear doesn't get to run the show. You told me that the night before my first recital. That was different. No, it wasn't. Mecca's voice softened. This might be the first time in your life someone sees your worth openly. Not after 10 years. Not when you're desperate. But right now. And you're hesitating because you're used to fighting for scraps. Denise turned to look at her. You think I should take it? I think. Do not allow fear to guide your decision. They remained silent for a while longer. The following morning, Denise drove the Lucid. She drove slowly, not far, just a few miles down to a nearby diner, where she and Mecca used to eat breakfast when Mecca was little. She needed a place to think without feeling confined. While she drank her coffee, an older man in a corduroy jacket sitting at the counter gave her a polite nod. Beautiful car outside, he said. Denise turned, feeling a little unsteady, still adjusting. Can't complain about good fortune, he remarked, moving his cup. You simply need to ensure you utilize it wisely. But Denise understood that blessings invariably carried a cost, and the subsequent action would necessitate her abandoning everything she believed about herself, to evolve into someone else. Assuming she possessed the bravery, Denise remained in her kitchen, her arms crossed, observing the document Roland's assistant had provided. It detailed the job description and compensation package. The title, Director of Clinical Programs, still felt unfamiliar, like something that belonged to someone else. The numbers on the salary line alone made her chest tighten. She'd always been modest, made her way on steady, honest work. Never dreamed of 6 figures, certainly not with benefits and a personal driver listed in the perks. It felt unreal, uncomfortable even, but not because it wasn't real, because part of her believed she didn't deserve it. Denise answered the phone, not to contact Roland, but to reach out to someone else, a name she hadn't spoken in years. Hi, is this Bernardine Willis? A moment of silence. Then a recognizable voice responded, Yes, who is calling? It was Denise. Denise Lattimore. They had worked together at Jefferson Medical when they were both assigned to the night shift. Another pause, then a surprised laugh. Girl, are you kidding me? Denise? From 2A? I thought you disappeared. I was let go this week. The line was silent for a moment. And you? You were excellent. That's what I believed as well. Denise outlined the situation concisely. The collapse. The man. The offer. Bernardine expressed quiet disbelief. And you're contacting me because? Because I harbor doubts. And because I fear I might not be adequate. Bernardine responded immediately. Denise, the hospital never appreciated your value. We all recognize that. You mentored half those new employees while they rewarded positions to individuals who couldn't recall the crash cart protocols. Denise laughed once. I recall, when someone recognizes your value and offers you the opportunity to influence things, embrace it. Denise felt a warmth behind her eyes. And what if it fails? She inquired. Then you'll leave with your head held high, as you always have. But don't decline because you believe you'll be out of place. You're not. More than most. That night, Denise didn't pace the floor. She didn't overthink. She retrieved the contract, reviewed it completely, and then signed. The following morning, Roland contacted her. I allowed you a few days, he stated. You weren't required to have them, Denise responded. My decision is made. A pause followed on his end, then a drawn-out breath. Are you certain? I am certain. She continued. However, I require one thing from you. Anything. She clarified, I don't want to be a token hire. I don't want you to showcase me as your feel-good project. If I am joining, I'm coming to work. I will build the team. I will call the shots. Roland's voice became serious. That's precisely why I wanted you, he said. And with a chuckle, he added, I'm not addressing you as sir. Deal, he concluded. A meeting was scheduled for Monday. He would have his legal team finalize onboarding procedures. She would visit the campus they were assessing in Tuscaloosa, the location for the first community clinic. After she ended the call, Denise paused in the kitchen, her bare feet on the tile floor, as sunlight streamed through the blinds. She had just made what felt like the biggest decision of her life. It wasn't born of necessity, but of deliberate choice. Mecca appeared at the head of the stairs, still in pajamas, rubbing her eyes. You're up early, she observed. I have work to do. Her daughter addressed her. Did you take it? Mecca replied, I did. Mecca smiled. "I'm proud of you, Mom," she said. "I'm proud of me too." However, Denise understood that this wasn't the conclusion. It marked the start of a life she never imagined achieving, and she was now entering it, not as someone pleading for a place, but as someone asserting her right to it. When Denise first passed through the double glass doors of the building in Tuscaloosa, the feeling wasn't one of intrusion. It felt like returning to a familiar place. The building wasn't elaborate, not yet. The flooring was concrete, the walls unadorned, and wires still protruded from the ceiling, but she envisioned it clearly. She saw the intake desk positioned to the right, a children's play area directly opposite, consultation rooms extending along the rear hallway, a location where care would not be a luxury. It would be commonplace. Roland entered, carrying rolled-up blueprints beneath one arm and a coffee in the other. He gave it to her silently. She smiled and accepted it. "Day one," he stated. "More like step one," she responded. During the subsequent weeks, Denise began her work. She sought out not only former colleagues, but also individuals who had been overlooked, underutilized, and undervalued. This included nurses, aides, translators, and even a former janitor who desired to learn administrative tasks. Denise possessed the ability to nurture potential, training those with the willingness to learn. Her focus wasn't constructing a clinic, it was cultivating a culture. Each morning, she drove the same car, a gift from Lucid Greaves, not to display it, but to recall the origins of her work. It was a reminder of that pivotal moment in the park, hands placed on a stranger's chest, desperately hoping to detect a heartbeat. After 6 months, the clinic quietly opened its doors, without fanfare or publicity, simply relying on patience. A woman accompanied by her 2 children, who had not received medical care in 3 years. A man with uncontrolled diabetes, a teenager seeking assistance with anxiety. Denise welcomed each individual as if they were old friends. There were no barriers of paperwork or procedure, just compassionate care. One afternoon, while she was revising intake protocols at her desk, her receptionist softly knocked on the open door and announced, "There's someone here requesting to see you." Without a name given, Denise entered the lobby and paused, visibly surprised. He was the man from the park. Roland had visited, sure, but this wasn't him. This was the man she'd knelt beside, whose chest she compressed until life returned. Dressed in a simple navy sweater and jeans, with a quiet smile that conveyed something deeper than words. "I never thanked you properly," he said. "You did more than enough." He walked over slowly, pulled something from his pocket. A small, flat velvet box. Denise shook her head. "If that's jewelry, I swear I'll toss it right back." He laughed. "No, it's not jewelry." She opened the box. Inside was a bronze medallion, etched with an emblem she didn't recognize. "It's from my mother's side," he said. "Passed down 3 generations. My grandmother gave it to my mom when she became the first black woman in her district to run a public health clinic." Denise's fingers closed gently around it. "I think she'd have wanted you to have it." She swallowed hard. "I'm not family." "You're exactly what family looks like," he said softly. "At least the kind that saves lives." Later that night, Denise sat on her porch again. Not with tea, with silence. The good kind. The kind that lets you breathe. The street was quiet. No more engines. No more questions. Just peace. Mecca stepped out, leaned on the railing beside her. "Long day?" she asked. "Best kind," Denise said. They sat together, watching the sky turn purple over the rooftops. After a long pause, Mecca said, "It's funny. What is? How you save a life, and somehow it ended up saving yours too." Denise didn't reply. She didn't need to, because she understood now. Some moments fundamentally alter everything. Not because they're dramatic or widely known, but because they reveal your true character when you are alone. And when you act from love, without any expectation of reward, sometimes life responds in an unexpected way. Should you find yourself in a situation where your efforts feel unseen and your work goes unrecognized, please recall this. Gratitude may not always be expressed openly, but it remains. And when it does reappear, it can be more significant than you could have foreseen. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who could benefit from hearing it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. We have more stories similar to this that demonstrate the profound impact of a single positive decision.